Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky from a room in New York City, from somewhere in New York City, Anshe Chesed. It's great to see you. We have an amazing Parsha. This Parsha gives us some of the real important commandments of living in the land. You come to the land, and of course these are commandments that are issued at Mount Sinai, and they deal with the land, and they take us into the cycle of the land. You are going to count 7 years. Sheish shanim tizra sadecha. 6 years you may sow your field. 6 years you may prune your vineyard. But in the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. Uvashana shvi'it shabbat shabbaton yel ar. So let's take a second to talk about the cycles and how this works and what the purpose of these commandments are, what kinds of questions the Torah is trying to answer. And then we have some meaty material that is going to really perplex us, challenge us. Jeremy, you want to start with the cycles of the land and the agricultural life of Israel?
Here we are at the end of Parshat. We're at the end of Sefer Vayikra, and we're looking towards getting ready to enter the land. And so a set of laws are created for land ownership, but it's a particular relationship to the land that both has a kind of a spiritual connection and a social, economic, political connection. Everything in the Torah, has got a cycle of 7, right? There's 7 days of creation, 6 days of creation, the 7th day rest, and 6 days of work in the week and the 7th day rest. And the same thing applies to the land, is that you're supposed to work the land and get produce for 6 years. And then there is a time of lying fallow for a whole year in which you're not supposed to work the land. And then you go through a 7 times that of 49 years of 7 cycles. And then in the 50th years is a macro jubilee in which there's 2 full years of letting the land rest. And part of that is about having the appropriate relationship to the land. We don't, we're not supposed to just like wring every last penny of profit out of it. You have a respect for it. In a sense, you might think that the people don't really own the land. Gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You are like sojourners with me in this land. And so there's a kind of a spiritual relationship that comes with letting the land rest. In addition, there's a huge element in economic relationship, which is to say that every 7 years, there aren't any landowners, and there aren't any tenants, everybody is equal. And every 50th year, all the people who have been slaves get sold free. Even if you went through that process of, boring through your ear and say you want to be a slave for the rest of your time, you go free in the Jubilee. And people who've grown poor and had to sell off their land, and there was no kind of economic stability in the ancient world like land ownership, they're poor, they had to sell off their land, they all get it back, and a second economic chance every 50th year in the Jubilee. So you have the institutions here, which I think are oriented towards your personal cycles of work and rest, but also social and economic, make sure that inequality doesn't get out of control, and people who've been, knocked around a little bit, hard knock life, they get a second chance at economic stability as well.
It's an interesting concept, that everything goes through these cycles of reset. The 7-year cycle, which resets the land, and the 50-year cycle, which in a sense resets the entire economy. I mean, we're going through a bit of economic upheaval now. With the stock market is crazy, and inflation is out of control. In a way, these economic forces are so chaotic. And here, I think the Torah is trying to impose a certain kind of order over what could, in fact, become a rather chaotic and orderless system. I don't know, Barry, you want to have any reflection on this?
Sure. It reminds me very much of medieval history, where there was a concentration of land in the great landowners, and the people that worked the land became almost enslaved. We refer to them as serfs because their status was not much better than a slave. And I think that, there are a lot of curiosities about both the sabbatical year as it's described here, You also have descriptions in Sefer Devarim and Sefer Shemot, and the Jubilee year, because it's sort of hard to figure out what exactly the Jubilee year is, because if you're not going to grow anything for the 49th year, which is the seventh sabbatical cycle, and again, not in the 50th year, you're not going to get any crops for another year after that, because as we know, you don't just plant and grow in a week. It takes an entire season to prepare the land again. But I think there's a leveling here, not just of the land, but of our relationship with the land, because the Torah's phrasing is that when you rest on the seventh year, the Jubilee year, it's going to be for food for you and for everyone else. So a farmer, especially at this time in history, is mostly growing crops for himself. I assume most of the farmers were male, but him or herself. And in the Jubilee year, that land has to be shared, the produce of the land has to be shared with everyone. The farmer has no more claim on his land than does the neighbor. And I think the point here is to reinforce over and over again that the land does not belong to us, but we belong to the land. And the land is our master, as it were, and we serve it in the same way that we serve God.
Okay, so and we are going to be a community on the land, and one of the things that we need to point out here is that the Torah then wants to focus on the human relationships, on the relationships that it will exist between individuals on the land, and directly after these rules concerning the agricultural cycles, we have a phrase that occurs at least 3 times here. V'chi yamuch ahikha, ki yamuch ahikha. If your kinsman is in straits, that's how the JPS translates it. But ahikha is a powerful word. Ahikha is your brother. They translate as your kinsman. In Israel today, it's slang for a bro. Achi. You. And if you're a stranger, there's an implied intimacy, even if you're a stranger, because we're kind of related to each other as Jews. But I want to speak to this here. Speak to just the word ahikha, and then take us to the challenging moment, which we will discuss in a second, which is when the expression of kinship, the value of kinship collides with your own life. So Jeremy, take us to ahikha.
Okay, so we have I don't remember exactly the locution in Exodus where some of the sabbatical material is in there, but I do remember that it isn't the same as ahikha, and I think that that repetition of whether it's this kins word or like brother, we're close, we're tight. Vayikra is trying to, I think effectively, I think not just trying to, I think successfully, has a rhetoric of kinship and solidarity in the face of poverty. So the people who are growing poor, they are suffering. You know who they are? They're not strangers. They're your family. They may not be literally your immediate family, but they are family. I think that we have a vast, 375 million Americans or whatever. It's hard for us to feel that way. I live in New York City. There's a lot of poverty all around. It's hard to feel that way in New York City. But what the Torah is trying to cultivate for ancient Israel is that sense that all the poor people around you, who have to sell off their land, who might have to sell themselves into slavery, who might have to sell themselves into slavery to non-Israelites, you have got to come through for them so that they can live. And there's a series of them. It's like if they have to sell off their land, you're going to buy it back from them, and that should take care of it. Or they might have to sell off their land in the city, and you're going to come through for them, and that should take care of it. But if that doesn't take care of it, he's growing poor. You got to give him he's suffering. Mata yado imakh, his hand is wavering. You got to pick him up strong. Geret toshav v'cha. You got to give him a job so that he can. You got to give him a loan so that he can maintain himself economically, and you can't take any interest. And then if the person has to even sell themselves into slavery. I happen to be in 2539 here. Ahikha imakh v'nim karlach lo tavod bo avodat aved. The person is sold to you as an indentured servant. You can't treat them like a slave. You have to treat them like someone who's got a respectful, dignified job. So all these cases are about helping a person who's suffering economically, all the measures that will be necessary to strengthen them such that they can live in a dignified, independent way.
So, in other words, the Torah is trying to educate us, instruct us to this value of mutual responsibility. That we are. I mean, is this an answer to Hashomer Achi Anochi? Is this harking back to Genesis? I'm my brother's keeper.
Well, it's interesting because in Genesis, we have a story about a shepherd and a farmer. And here in Vayikra, we're talking about two farmers. And I think it's important to keep that in mind because I think the emphasis on the ahikha is to remind you as the farmer of your land that the land you're farming is also your brother's land because it's a family farm. And you got your cut presumably when your father died and your brother got his. And the fact that you are doing well now and your brother is not doing well is not really a matter of your hard work and the other's laziness. It's a matter of happenstance. It could have been you that needed help and your brother who would have to provide it for you. And one of the great images of the land in the Bible is that the land is eternal. It is close to God in that respect. Our tenure on the land is temporary because our lives are temporary. And too often, I think part of the message of the Torah here is that we think that our lives are what's permanent and the land under our feet is what is temporary and changing.
All right, so I want to jump off from this context to a context in which this phrase "v'chei ahikha imakh," so that your brother will live with you. So this becomes the punchline, if we will, of a rather important rabbinic debate. The rabbinic debate which occurs on page 62A of Tractate Bava Metzia. It's a debate between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petora. We know a little bit about Rabbi Akiva. We don't know as much about Ben Petora, but they're talking about two people who walk in the desert and they have one kiton shel mayim, one canteen, one flask of water, and there's only enough water in the flask for one of them to survive. If the two drink it, they will die. So the debate, pick up the debate from there, Rabbi Kalmanovsky.
So this is, our listeners may be familiar. There's a philosopher called Judith Jarvis Thompson, and she's like an author of these trolley problems, right? You have a situation where there's an out of control trolley. People may be familiar. It played a big role in the show with Ted Danson, The Good Place. The character played by Kristen Bell she's a bad person and she's been sent to the other world and she's getting a moral education, and so it raises the problem of there's a certain number of people who are the trolley problem in the way it's usually talked about. The trolley's out of control. It's going to run over 5 people and kill 5 people, but if you could throw the switch, those 5 people will be saved, but you'll throw the switch, you'll realign the track, and the trolley will now run to another track, which will kill one person who is currently out of harm's way. So you save the 5 people who are in mortal risk, but you kill the one person who is currently, safe. And people debate about, it's obviously better that one person die than 5, but the action that you would take that would materially advance the death of somebody, that might be wrong too. So we could talk about all of those some other time, but this is like a Talmudic version. You have the two people. The one person possesses the canteen. That we don't know why that one person possesses the canteen. Was that one person planful, thoughtful, protected the water? Did the person who doesn't have the canteen, were they just like, they didn't do a good job of planning? Did they drink it all thirstily the first hour? Did a lion come along and chase them and he dropped the canteen? We don't know why he doesn't have the canteen, but one guy has the canteen.
It's
one
a
guy
fact of the case.
The fact of the case is that Reuven has the canteen and Shimon does not have the canteen. And if they share it, they will be in solidarity to each other until the last minute of their lives. And they will.
Right, so I have the Hebrew. Im shotin shnehem metim.
If they both share it, they will both die, but they will die in solidarity.
V'im shoteh echad mehen magia liyishuv.
But if the person who possesses the canteen manages that water, he will reach that next town, having left the other person behind, and will manage the water resources and survive. Yasher koyach for him.
Exactly, and then it says darash ben Petora mutav sheyishtu shnehem v'yamutu.
Bar Petora says it's better that they share the water and both die. And it says velo, right? What's next?
Right, and then ve'al yira'eh echad mehem b'mitato shel chavero.
And Bar Petora says, essentially, it would be inhuman for you to sit there and watch your friend die of thirst and do nothing. You would be diminished as a person if your comrade said, I'm dying of thirst, help me please. And you said, sorry, buddy, should have brought another canteen. Like, that's just inhuman. And Bar Petora says, you just can't diminish your own humanity that way. Better you should die in solidarity together.
And then it says, Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva v'limed v'chei ahikha imakh. Your brother
Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, I got a verse which says no. Chayecha kodmin l'chayei chavercha.
Exactly.
That your life, the point of all these anti-poverty measures is that you should be generous, you should give tzedakah, you should rescue your comrades when they're in economic trouble, you should buy back their land, you should give them interest-free loans so that they live with you. You have to be alive to help anybody live with you. So his position is, you got to protect your own life, and then all the other good things that you may do as a member of society, all the other mitzvot that you may do as a worshipful person, all the other acts of tzedakah, that they become permissible, theoretical, practical, if you survive it. If you don't survive, you're not going to do anything good. So Rabbi Akiva's like, no, hang in there, get to the next town, and you might have to watch your friend die of thirst.
It's so difficult to contemplate this, and we don't have the ultimate frame of reference where we have had experience where we need to give up our lives or we need to watch, endure someone suffering like this. I'm wondering, the dilemma is posed in such a way that we don't get to see the next scene, and if we were to go ahead with the next scene, it's like, so the person who has the canteen survives. And my question is, how does he live with himself, right? How is it possible to live with yourself when, yes, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's your water, you take the water, but how do you live with yourself as a human being after that? And is, what other dilemmas come out of this? Or does this satisfy an impulse of altruism or even martyrdom here? And how do we focus on this? How do we reflect on this this kind of situation? If the dominant theme here is chayecha kodmin, your life is for, I can get that. You have to save yourself. I think about that. My example of that is, the announcement comes on before you take off, and so the flight attendant says, if we lose oxygen in the cabin, put the mask on yourself and then put it on the person seated next to you. So I kind of relate to this as, save yourself first, because you will be needed to save another person. I don't know, Barry. You want to you kind of
Yeah, it's as you well say, it is a difficult story. I find Bar Petora's argument to be perplexing because the assumption seems to be if they both drink, they will die at the exact same time, not facing each other, because otherwise they would each see the death of the other. And I find that troubling as well. And I think that part of the answer is the expectation that the person who is going with the water is going to keep going. And at some point, the person without the water is going to fall by the wayside. Not necessarily that he is going to minister to the person who's dying. That's one way to read it. And I think the way that you live with yourself ultimately is you rely on human resilience. I think that we all, or most of us, have within us a tremendous drive to live. And we can assimilate all sorts of things, sometimes in healthy and sometimes in unhealthy ways, that enable us to live through terrible situations.
So would you write the story, the next chapter of this as, and so the guy took the water, the person who owned the canteen, he drank the water, and then he trekked, however many kilometers, miles it needed to trek. He was able to secure a supply of water, and he went back to his friend with a supply of water to save him. And does he save him?
Never. I don't know that he does, because
Yes.
in life we often, our best efforts are not always rewarded in the way that we wish.
Okay.
But I think that one possibility is that the second person's life has a claim on the survivor,
Yeah.
and perhaps he dedicates his life in some meaningful way
Okay.
to the
Okay.
person who
So
dies.
hold that for a second, because I want, and Jeremy, I don't know if you had a reaction to that, but somehow I feel like this collides with the altruistic spirit, or it collides. Altruism would be, let's both drink it and we'll die. And Barry, you have them not looking at each other. Maybe it's like they're holding on to each other, and they're both they're not leaving each other. This is hero. There's heroism in Bar Petora. This is 9/11. The guy who stays in the tower with the guy in the wheelchair. I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to let you die alone. And he's saying, no, you need to save yourself. You need to save yourself. There's something very ultimate about this. No,
Perhaps there's the late President Reagan used to tell a story related to this, and maybe it sheds some light on it. And so in President Reagan's story, there's a bomber that is hit by enemy fire, and the tail gunner is the 20-year-old kid, and he's mortally wounded. And the pilot or the captain tells him he won't let him die alone. And so presumably the plane crashes and they all die. And, obviously President Reagan, who was a gifted storyteller, told it a lot better than I just did. But what President Reagan was never able to explain is, if everyone dies on the plane, how did he hear the story? And
It's in a movie.
but the light that it sheds is that sometimes we create a fictional world in order to make sense of our real world, as President Reagan did.
Yeah.
And I think that, perhaps in this case, the best we could do is figure out what both Rabbi Akiva and Bar Petora are actually saying. Because I think the way that Jeremy represented Bar Petora, his position and the words that he chooses don't necessarily make sense. I don't know that it's altruistic to let two people die when only one is necessary.
So what you're saying,
it can't quite be. You're right about the word altruism in this case, because it's not for the sake of your fellow, or at least it's because if two people are going to die, it's funny to talk about this as altruistic. It is, however, you can still think of how you can talk about it as a moral triumph. And Elliot used the word heroism, which I think is true. We're all going to die, and let's hope that we die amidst acts of kindness and care and love. And I think Bar Petora is is saying that it would diminish you as a person to be so to be so cruel about it. And I do find this intense. I mean, we spoke a little bit before we started recording about we've all heard many stories about people in the Shoah under the most extreme situations who shared their food, right? Who were not ruthless. I mean, actually, in Maus, I remember Maus says, or maybe this was Viktor Frankl. Either way, it's I think it's Viktor Frankl actually said, that Auschwitz, that people, manifested the most extreme brutality and selfishness and the most giving, generous, the heights that they rose to. I think that Rabbi Akiva there's a kind of not, I don't mean that he's being, emotionally, dead or anything. That's what consequentialism is. That's what utilitarianism is as a philosophy. It's to make a calculation. And he makes the calculation that it's better for one person to die than two people to die. But there is something, I think tremendously moving to think about those people in Auschwitz or in the ghettos that shared their food, even at risk to their own survival, that those are acts of greatness, moral greatness. And if they both died, you would say it was heroic and tragic. And that's what I think Bar Petora is going for, the heroic and the tragic.
Right.
So what I would add to what you said, so I think it's fair to say, Jeremy, that you see Bar Petora's act as one of ennobling. It makes a better person of us for both of the people to die. But I think my point would be is that that's only true in a story. Because if in fact they both died, we would have no story about the two people. And if they were the last two people, that would be the end of the world. And I think that sometimes we have to think about that as well, that there are, our task, as it were, is to live a meaningful life. And in order to do that, we have to live. That has to be our choice.
Let me ask you this question, okay? Because maybe there's a resolution, which is, I have the water. Okay, I'll be the altruistic person here. I have the water, and Rabbi Akiva has given me permission to drink it based on the text. Your life takes precedence. So I say, okay, I have the water, but out of my own autonomy, I hereby give you the water, and I want you to live. I will lay down my life for you. Okay, so this is the ultimate altruism, which is I know I have the right to the water. I know it's mine, but I freely give it to you, and therefore you will survive. And if it happens that you get to a town, 20 kilometers from here and bring back, a whole, jerry can, great. If not, I know I will have saved your life.
I don't think that. I think that. First of all, I'm quite sure that each of the three of us, if we and any of our four children were the other person,
absolutely,
for sure you give the kid. That's not even a question.
For just not even a blink of an eye.
Not even a blink of an eye. But I think in the universe of Jewish normativity, I don't think you'd be allowed to do that. Because
who can? It's not normativity. It's I've made a declaration. I'm sitting. I'm with my child. I give you the water.
No. The kids fine. Now it's not the kids. Now it's just Yanko.
Oh, it's just you and me.
just
well,
you
we're Yanko, Jeremy.
You and I are both. it's you and me and Moish. And I don't think that if it was just Moish, or even if it was Einstein, or even if it was whoever, that would be like suicide, and it wouldn't be. There was a movie, by the way. Many of our listeners may remember this movie called Into the Void, about a mountain climbing accident. Do you guys remember this mountain climbing accident?
The Wild,
the one guy.
Yeah.
This was a exceptional movie because it interspersed fictionalized representations and interviews with the real people, but this is a true Bar Petora Rabbi Akiva story. Two guys are mountain climbing in the Andes, and one guy is sort of serving as the anchor, and the other guy, some sort of accident happens, an avalanche or whatever it happens, and the one climber is stuck in a crevasse. He cannot touch the sides, and the person who's acting as the anchor there's nothing that he can do with the rope to adjust where this person is. So this person, the two of them are stuck. The one guy who's sort of the base, the other guy who's floating in the void, attached by a rope. It's like it goes on for 3 days or whatever it is. And it is evident that there is no other option. If they both stay there, they will both die. And if he cuts the rope, if the guy who's the base cuts the rope, the other person will fall to his death, but he will be able to leave. So he, in fact, does this, and he cuts the rope, and he does go back to civilization and survives, racked with guilt. The guy who was floating in the void falls to the bottom of the crevasse, but does not die. He breaks his legs, but he doesn't die, and in fact crawls out of the mountain and makes it back to civilization. And part of the theme of this movie is that the guy who cut the rope and saved himself at what he thought was the fatal expense of his friend was racked with guilt, and the mountain climbing community said you did the wrong thing. But the other guy who was left for dead but did not die, made it back, said you did the absolute right thing. This was the only thing you could have done. And even though, it wouldn't have worked for my benefit, although we both survived, you did the right thing. And he tried to assuage his friend's guilt, but I think pretty much unsuccessfully.
Sure. How do you, even though the guy's alive, you need a lot of therapy for that. Barry, last word, and we got to go.
I would agree. A lot of therapy is in order.
Look, the Parsha doesn't deal with all this guilt, but it's fascinating for us to use these words and that classic debate as a springboard for a larger conversation about the values of life, altruism, sacrifice, and what really matters, and what does it mean to live with yourself and to live in your community, to live with your kinsman, your brother.
So I guess the final word would be is that what the Parsha is teaching us is that we are all family and we must treat each other accordingly.
Elliot, you said this before. I want to just, bang on this cowbell. It really does echo very strongly that Hashomer Achi Anochi. Back at the beginning of the Torah, Cain renounces responsibility for his brother, but this Parsha is bang, 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 bang. Everybody is responsible for everybody else. You are all kinsfolk, and you have to come through for each other in emergencies, and you are absolutely responsible for your kinsfolk's lives.
What a great answer. What a great answer to the first question the second question of the Torah. And with that, we will conclude with so great. We thank you for watching and listening to our amazing Parsha Talk, and we hope that you'll join us again on the next edition. So we want to say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.